claim to be an angel, and I've openly admitted to everything that I've ever done.
The people that knew him would have thought that the Pope would be more capable of committing a crime.
I wanted to hang his ass. I wanted to rip his eyeballs out, tear his head off. That's what I wanted to do.
I just can't picture that his sexual appetite got so much out of control.
He was not only one of the craziest, but one of the scariest human beings because he functioned in normal society.
He is the most notorious serial murderer ever. No one can hold a candle to Jhon Gacy.
In late November 1998, Chicago police cordoned off a section of the city's northwest side. Reporters and onlookers gathered on the chance that there might be a gruesome discovery. Police had received a tip that the yard behind this picket fence had been used as a burial ground 20 years earlier by John Wayne Gacy. Investigators dug it up and found nothing at all. And yet the attention lavished on this one bad lead was a fitting postscript to the life of a man who fooled the world while he killed at least 33 people.
Gacy, I'm sure, from wherever he is right now, was laughing hilariously at the people digging, or he's laughing today that they didn't dig in the right place to find something that he's left.
Up 16-year-old Tim McCoy at the Greyhound bus station. John offered to show the boy the sights, then lured him back to his house, where they engaged in sex. When they were done, Gacy grabbed a kitchen knife and plunged it into the teenager's chest. Then he buried the body in the crawl space under his house. On the night of July 31st, 1975, Gacy had the house to himself and invited over one of his young employees. 16-year-old John Butkovich had worked for Gacy for nearly a year. First, on the pretext of doing a magic trick, he coaxed the boy into slipping on a pair of handcuffs.
And he says, "What's the trick to this? I can't get these things off." And at that time, Gacy went in his pocket and grabbed the key to the handcuffs and says, "The trick is, you have to have the key."
Then, with his victim gagged by his own underwear, the sexual torture began. Afterwards, Gacy looped a rope around the teenager's neck, then slid a stick between the knots.
It's a tourniquet, so it cut off the air. So if you're going to kill somebody, you just put it on their neck and twist it 3 times or 4 times or whatever until the person stopped moving.
He removed the handcuffs and disposed of the body. Now Gacy had killed twice. His psychiatrists would come to believe that the motive could be traced to his abusive childhood. Abduct teenage boys, sometimes at gunpoint, and drive them back to his suburban house, where he would rape and kill them. But he was growing tired of digging holes in his crawl space. He wanted graves readily available. Gacy hired an unsuspecting employee, David Cram, to trench for piping and instructed him to break ground only in the areas he had marked.
He would lay out the trench. All right, this is where you dig, this is where you dig. Don't vary from the path. And there was also comments about the time factor. He'd come down, see how I was doing. How's it going? Are we done yet? You done being down there?
Cram also rented the spare bedroom in his boss's house. He returned home one night and found Gacy drunk and dressed in his clown costume. Gacy invited Cram to join him for a drink. The men had a few Mai Tais, then Gacy tricked Cram into the handcuffs.
And he's laughing, ha, 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 you know, just like a little kid. You know, and again, I'm standing there looking at a clown in a clown suit, laughing at me because I'm locked up. And he's like poking me. Does it bother you? Huh? Does that bother you? Huh? So I told him, I said, if you don't take these off, I'm going to kick your ass.
The teenager then saw a side of his boss that few ever lived to tell about.
It was just like a light switch went off in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a thought. He just starts growling like a mad dog.
Gacy lunged at Cram and swung him around the room, shouting, "I'm going to rape you." Despite the handcuffs, Cram was able to push Gacy to the ground. he somehow managed to grab the key and escape to his room. David Cram moved out. Others were not so lucky. By the end of 1977, Gacy had killed 19 young men in his home, all the while carefully maintaining his double life. In May 1978, he was back in the limelight, organizing the Polish Independence Day Parade in Chicago. The guest of honor was none other than First Lady Rosalind Carter. At a function that evening, the serial killer mingled just inches from the president's wife. By December, Gacy was committing a murder every 2 or 3 weeks. He showed no signs of stopping until an investigation into a missing youth would lead police to Gacy's front door. By 1978, 36-year-old John Wayne Gacy had sexually tortured and killed 32 young men. He had not only managed to cover up his crimes, but to keep up his status as a businessman and community leader in Chicago. On December 11th, Gacy met with a client of his contracting company at the Nissan Pharmacy in suburban Des Plaines. Gacy was bidding on a remodeling job. Around closing time, he abducted 15-year-old Rob Peast, who worked at the drugstore. Gacy had lured him into the car with the promise of a better-paying job with his company. The teenager was never seen alive again. He became Gacy's 33rd victim. The next day, after witnesses at the pharmacy said Peast was last seen with Gacy, police questioned him about the boy's disappearance.
He would say, I was in the drugstore, but I never saw him. You got the wrong guy. It was always, I'll cooperate. He had gotten away with so much before that he thought he was so smooth that he'd get away with this one just as easily.
This time, Gacy couldn't talk his way out of trouble. Police didn't buy his story and got a warrant to search his house. While they found nothing they could tie to Peast, they did discover numerous personal items belonging to other missing teenagers. Gacy was now a murder suspect, but without the bodies, little could be done. Gacy was placed under 24-hour surveillance. If he was nervous about the police presence, he was putting up a good front. The first night of the stakeout, Gacy picked up the officer's dinner tab.
My partner and I had to continuously remind each other that he's a suspect for murder. I mean, he was a very likable guy, and he never really intimidated you. He wasn't the kind of guy that you'd be afraid of, but he was a hustler.
Gacy even had the surveillance team over to his house for a fish dinner. When one of the officers smelled a foul odor coming from the air vents, investigators were all but convinced that the crawl space below had become Gacy's makeshift burial ground.
We weren't giving up, and he could not lose the evidence. He was sitting on the evidence. And he knew we were seeking a second search warrant. So John was cornered.
Gacy realized the truth about his serial killings would soon be exposed. Out of desperation, he met with his attorney for an all-night confession.
And then he looked at me and said, I've been the judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people. Now I want to be my own judge, jury, and executioner. I don't want you to interfere. I'm going to tell you everything from the beginning. I kept telling him it was unbelievable, and that's why he offered to show me the crawl space. He was going to prove to me that he committed the murders, and I don't want any part of that.
Amirante didn't need to see it, because within hours, investigators were on their way. They had their second search warrant. When they descended into the crawl space, it didn't take long for them to dig up a human bone. On December 21st, 1978, John Wayne Gacy was arrested for murder. At the police station, Gacy seemed to take the news well and even joked with police while they were booking him. When investigators asked where he was born, Gacy looked up and proclaimed that he was, quote, born in a state of confusion. Gacy's home in suburban Chicago was besieged by a fleet of officers and evidence technicians. Captured on this rare police video, the excavation of the crawl space was carried out with the precision of an archaeological dig. Piece by piece, officers lifted the remains of Gacy's victims through the floorboards and carried them out the front door. It was then that John Wayne Gacy was introduced to the world as the worst serial killer in American history for the murders of 33 young men and boys. His case attracted widespread attention as people struggled to understand how anyone could be responsible for so many appalling crimes. Hoping to save Gacy's life, his attorneys entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. John did not appear worried about being considered a crazed serial killer. Instead, he was afraid the public might think he was homosexual, a charge he denied.
I would definitely not be homosexual. I have nothing against what they do, and I don't deny that I've engaged in sex with males, but that I'm bisexual.
Gacy was no textbook criminal. Even the psychiatric experts who testified at his trial were baffled by his complex personality. Out who Jhon Gacy was. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was found guilty and sentenced to death. Afterwards, he consoled his defense team and then asked to speak with his prosecutors.
He congratulated them for doing a great job. He said they did what they had to do, and he respected what they did, and they did a great job, and he actually congratulated them on getting the death penalty.
The serial killer was sent to death row at the Menard Correctional Center in southern Illinois. 5 years later, on May 10, 1994, Gacy's execution date arrived. He was to die by lethal injection at the Stateville Prison in Joliet, just south of Chicago. His sister Karen was there for the final hours.
I was losing a brother. I was losing someone that I loved. Of course, there was great sadness to have to part and say a final goodbye, to know that this person's not dying because they're sick. They're dying because someone's going to murder them.
Hundreds gathered outside the prison walls to celebrate Gacy's execution. Supporters of the death penalty believed that if anyone should be executed, it was Jhon Gacy. At 12:40 a.m., John closed his eyes and took a deep breath before the doctor injected the needle. 18 minutes later, 52-year-old John Wayne Gacy was dead.